Today we're starting off by looking at Matthew 6:25 in the Sermon on the Mount and Jesus' instruction on anxiety. There's a connection here we'll see between the things that we love and anxiety when it doesn't go well with those things. So from verse 25 on it says, "Therefore I tell you, do not be anxious about your life, what you will eat and what you will drink, nor about your body or about your clothes. Is not life more than food, and the body more than clothing? Look at the birds of the air. They neither sow nor reap, nor gather into barns, and yet your Father feeds them." We pause there and we notice that the clear instruction here is for us to not be anxious. But why is he saying to not be anxious? For what reason or what basis does he have to say this? Well, a key to this is looking at the first word of verse 25, which is therefore. The phrase, therefore, I tell you. That's telling us that there is some basis that's in the previous verses for this. And it's right there in verse 24. It says, "No one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other. You cannot serve God and money. You cannot serve God and money." Another word for money is wealth. So we cannot be devoted to God and material possessions. That's what the verse is saying. And if we're honest, how many of us can get anxious when we lose money or some possession that we value greatly? If you look at, for example, the stock market, people become very depressed or even commit suicide when it crashes or goes down very badly. If we're serving money and something happens to that, we will become stressed out or anxious because of it. Another passage that speaks to this is earlier in Matthew chapter 6, verse 19, where it says, "Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven." And then it goes on and says in verse 20, "Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." If your treasure is in your stuff, you will become anxious when you lose that. And this doesn't relate to just money either. It could be a relationship that you're in, or a position of power that you have, or a job that you love. When something related to these possessions or relationships goes wrong, we can get anxious. And what Jesus is saying is that you can't love God and other things. Either you'll hate the one and love the other, or you'll be devoted to the one and despise the other. So we understand here is that a lot of anxiety that we have actually comes from us being focused on material things. So notice that Jesus is going to say what Jesus is saying to someone who is actually anxious or who's going to be anxious. It's not go read a self-help book or go to a counselor. That's not his first piece of advice. What does he say to do? He says, look at the birds and see how things go for them. Verse 26 says, "Look at the birds of the air. They neither sow nor reap nor gather in barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not more valuable than they? And which of you, by being anxious, can add a single hour to his span of life?" And then it goes on about lilies being clothed, and they were clothed nicer than Solomon. They looked nicer than him, and how God takes care of them too. The birds don't plant food for themselves or save food in barns, and your Father takes care of them. In modern day terms, we could say they don't have savings accounts or long-term plans, and they do just fine. So what does a life without anxiety look like? One example that we've been given is the birds themselves. So serving God and not money is the key to obedience. We cannot live anxiety-free when our heart is on earthly things. So I would ask you today, where is your heart? Sooner or later you may find yourself anxious about something, and if anxiety has been something that's plagued you, take a serious look at what you're focused on and what you love, and check it out for yourself.